At the supermarket, my daughter-in-law snapped at the cashier. "She's just the help. Don't talk to her." My son and my grandson just burst out laughing. They had no idea I was the owner of the place. That very day, I nullified my will. I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, so I know how far my story has traveled. I should have been suspicious when Valerie insisted on coming to the supermarket with us. She never did anything, unless there was something in it for her, but there she was, all dressed up early in the morning. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a perfect, sleek bun. Her designer handbag clutched in her hands with their freshly manicured nails. "Come on, Grandma Beatrice," Matthew shouted from the back seat of Rob's SUV. "We're getting ice cream after we shop." At 70, it still made me happy when Matthew included me in his plans. It was a rare occasion. I settled in next to him in the back, my arthritis making the movement more awkward than I would have liked. Valerie shot me an annoyed look in the rearview mirror. "Try not to embarrass us in there," she muttered under her breath. She said it just loud enough for me to hear, but not for Rob, who was driving, to notice. I didn't answer. I'd learned over time that fighting Valerie on her passive-aggressive jabs only ever ended badly for me. Rob always took her side, and I was left with that hollow feeling, making me feel even smaller than before. The supermarket was packed for a Tuesday. Kids running around, elderly couples walking at a slow pace, office workers grabbing things for lunch. I'd been shopping at Maury's Market for over 30 years, long before Valerie even knew Rob existed. I knew the aisles and the faces. I felt at home here. We walked through the store with Valerie in the lead, bossing us around like a drill sergeant. She had her list, and God help anyone who deviated from it. Matthew stuck close to her, glancing at me every now and then with an expression I wanted to believe was affection, but was probably just politeness. When we got to the checkout line, I felt that familiar pang in my chest. The young man at the register, no older than his early 20s, with sincere eyes and a wide smile, started scanning our items. He saw me and smiled warmly. "Good morning, ma'am. How are you today?" Before I could even reply, Valerie cut in, her voice sharp and cold. "She's just the help. Don't talk to her." The blow hit me directly. The air left my lungs, and a hot flush crept up my face. The cashier's smile vanished, the discomfort on his face saying everything. But worse than Valerie's words was what came next. Rob, my son, the one I raised and sacrificed so much for, let out a laugh. It wasn't a nervous chuckle. It was a full-throated laugh, as if what Valerie had said was the funniest thing he'd heard in days. Matthew followed suit, his childish voice joining the chorus that made me swallow the full weight of my humiliation. "Yeah, Grandma's like our maid," he chirped between giggles, parroting something he had clearly heard at home. I just stood there, frozen. My hands were clenched so tightly around the handle of my old purse that my knuckles turned white. The cashier's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked more like pity, which, instead of helping, made it even worse. He didn't even look at me anymore, speaking only to Valerie, treating me as if I wasn't there. "Paper or plastic?" he asked her, his voice flatter than before. "Plastic," she said with the smug tone of someone who thinks they've won something. People in line behind us were starting to stare, some with discomfort, others with a morbid curiosity, as if watching a family feud was part of the show. I just wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor, and never have to face anyone again. But the ugliest part wasn't being publicly shamed. The worst part was realizing that this was how my own family saw me. Not as a mother, not as a grandmother, not even as someone who deserved a shred of respect. To them, I was an employee. Something to be managed, controlled, and occasionally mocked for a cheap laugh. As we left, Valerie hung on Rob's arm, cheerfully, chattering about her dinner ideas. Matthew skipped ahead, having already forgotten what had happened, and I trailed behind them, like the maid they had made me, carrying the bags filled with my own shame. The drive home was torture. They talked about their plans for the weekend. Valerie wanted to go to the spa. Rob wanted to play golf, and I sat in silence in the back seat, still choking on what had just happened. No one mentioned the ice cream we were promised. No one asked if I was okay. When we got home, I unloaded the groceries in the kitchen while they all scattered to their own corners of the house. I put everything away like a robot, my head still reeling from the blow. This was my life. This was what I had become. But there, alone in that kitchen, something inside me began to stir. For the first time in years, I asked myself if this was what I truly deserved. The silence in my room that night felt thicker than usual. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in the same clothes from the market trip, too drained to change. The scenes from Morris Market replayed endlessly in my mind, like an old cassette tape that couldn't be stopped. She's just the help. Every time I heard Valerie's words in my head, they hurt more. But it wasn't just her cruelty that was tearing me apart. It was Rob's laugh. My own son, the baby I had held in my arms, for whom I had worked 3 different jobs after his father left us, had laughed while I was being humiliated. I looked at my room, really looked at it. For the first time in a long while, it was the smallest one in the house, barely fitting the twin bed and a dresser. When Valerie moved in 5 years ago, she suggested I take this room, so they could have the master bedroom. It just makes more sense, she'd said, with that pleasant smile that never reached her eyes. We need more space for our things. I said yes, like I always did. It was easier than arguing, easier than being labeled difficult or ungrateful. After all, they were giving me a roof over my head, right? That's what Valerie said whenever she could, even though I had been living here for 15 years before she ever crossed the threshold. My reflection in the small corner mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. When did I become so small? When did I start shrinking myself, apologizing for taking up space in my own home? My gray hair was pulled back in the same simple bun as always. My clothes, clean but worn, were chosen more for durability than for style. I looked just as Valerie had described me, the help. But I wasn't always like this. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the woman I used to be, before Frank left, before Rob grew up and got married, before I learned to make myself disappear to avoid conflict. I had a small catering business that I ran from this very kitchen, nothing fancy, just home-cooked meals for people in the neighborhood and small gatherings, but it was mine, and I was good at it. People asked for my beef stew and my apple pie by name. I had clients who booked me months in advance for family dinners and celebrations, until Valerie started saying my business was an embarrassment, something unbecoming for a woman my age. She convinced Rob it was time for me to retire, that it wasn't safe having strangers coming in and out of the house. Little by little, she found excuses for me to turn down new orders. The kitchen was too messy, it was too noisy, it interrupted their routines. A year after she arrived, my business was gone. And with it, so was my freedom and the pride of doing something of my own. I became what she wanted me to be, a nanny and a housekeeper who earned her room and board. But tonight, sitting in the dim light of this tiny room, I remembered something that had almost been erased by all the cooking, cleaning, and tiptoeing around. I walked to the closet and pushed aside the old coats and dresses I rarely wore anymore. Behind them, deep in the back, was the safe I had installed years ago. My hands trembled slightly as I entered the combination. It was the date Frank left. For many, that date would be painful. But for me, it was always a symbol of resilience. Inside the safe were papers that neither Valerie nor Rob knew about. Bank statements, investment records, property deeds. When Frank left, I was terrified of being left financially vulnerable. Every dollar I could save from the catering business, every inheritance that came from a distant relative, every carefully considered investment over the years, it was all there, neatly organized and growing in silence. I took out the latest statements and read them by the light of a small lamp. Over the years, my careful investments had grown substantially. I had 3 rental apartments right downtown, a well-thought-out mix of investments, and yes, I was the 40% owner of Morris Market, the very place where I had been shamed today. The previous owner, Bill Morris, had been one of my catering clients. When he wanted to expand and needed capital, it was me who quietly backed him, in exchange for a stake in the business. It was all legal, all on paper, but I never told Rob or Valerie what for. They would only try to meddle, start making decisions for me, manage my money, and interfere in my dealings. Since Valerie came to live here, it became clear that if I showed any sign of independence or self-sufficiency, she took it as a threat to her dominance. I once mentioned I had a little savings put away, and she immediately started suggesting I could help them with various payments. When I talked about a small rental property I owned, she instantly hinted that I should sell it and give them the money for Matthew's college fund. So I stopped telling them anything. I let them believe I was living off their charity, that I had nothing and no one else. I chose to keep the peace, even if it meant swallowing my pride. But tonight, looking at those papers, I understood I had given up more than my pride. I had given up myself. The woman who had built this small world of properties and investments wasn't some weak, aimless person. She was smart, skilled, capable. She was someone who deserved respect, not someone who should stay silent when her own family called her the help. I put the papers back in the safe, carefully, but I didn't close it all the way. Tomorrow, I was going to make some calls. I was going to visit some offices I hadn't been to in years. I was going to start remembering who I was before I spent so long trying to be what they wanted me to be. When I finally put on my nightgown and got ready for bed, I saw myself in the mirror. Again, this time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who had been playing a role for so long, she'd forgotten it was just an act. But every performance, sooner or later, must come to an end. 3 days after the supermarket incident, I was coming back from my afternoon walk when I heard voices from the living room. The front door was ajar, and Valerie's shrill laugh filled the house. She had company again, which meant I was supposed to disappear until her friends left. I was already heading to my room when I heard my name. The tone of it froze me at the foot of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can stand having her here, Valerie was saying, in that cutting tone she used when she thought she was being funny. She just wanders around like a lost soul, always in the way. Can't you just put her in a home? Asked a voice I didn't recognize, one of her new friends from the book club. Valerie's laugh was dry and measured. Oh, believe me, I've looked into it, but Rob gets all sentimental every time I bring it up. Says, we can't just dump his poor old mother. Her voice was dripping with the fake pity she feigned so well. What he doesn't get is that she's the one dumping on us, with how much of a burden she is. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the wall, out of sight but close enough to catch every word. Besides, Valerie continued, we're waiting for the will to be settled, if you know what I mean. Rob thinks she might have something stashed away, maybe a life insurance policy. It would be foolish to make a move before we know exactly what's there. Then, another voice spoke up. It was Sandra, a woman I'd seen several times at family gatherings. How much longer can it take? Seriously, what is she? 70. And she looks even older. That's just it. Valerie let out with an exaggerated sigh. She's stronger than she looks. She could hang on for another 10 years, who knows? And in the meantime, I'm stuck here, playing nurse to someone who contributes nothing to this house. The coldness of it chilled me to the bone. I always knew Valerie didn't like me, but hearing her talk about my death as if it were a business transaction shook me. So what does she do all day? Sandra asked. Oh, she keeps busy, Valerie replied, her tone acidic. She cooks, cleans, watches Matthew when we need her to. Free labor, basically. I suppose she has her uses, but honestly, the problems are starting to outweigh the benefits. I heard footsteps and knew someone was heading toward the kitchen. I slipped quietly up the stairs, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they would hear it from downstairs. Once, in my room, I collapsed onto the bed, trying to process what I had just heard. They were waiting for me to die, not for me to live peacefully, surrounded by love. They were waiting for my death so they could take what little they imagined I had. And Rob, my son, knew about it. He'd probably had similar conversations. The man I raised with patience and tenderness was talking about me as if I were an investment that hadn't paid out yet. The most painful part was how wrong they were about everything. They knew nothing about my financial situation, nothing about what I truly contributed to this house, nothing about who I really was. They saw me as a burden, an old piece of furniture taking up space until life decided to move me out of the way. They had no idea that this old woman they wanted to get rid of could change their entire future with a single phone call. Later, after Valerie's friends had left and the house returned to its routine, I prepared dinner as usual. Rob ate without looking up from his phone. Valerie picked at her plate while scrolling through social media, and Matthew cleared his plate before disappearing to his room for video games. This chicken is a little dry, Valerie commented without looking at me. Maybe use less seasoning next time. I nodded without saying anything, even though the chicken was perfect, juicy and seasoned, just as it always was. Her comment wasn't about the food, it was her way of marking her territory, of making it clear who she thought was in charge here. As I cleared the dishes, I heard them talking about their weekend plans. Valerie was planning a wine tasting with her friends. Rob wanted to go fishing. Matthew would stay with me, of course, which meant I would be in charge of entertaining a 12-year-old boy while they enjoyed their leisure time. "Mom," Rob said suddenly, the first time he'd spoken directly to me all evening. "Valerie and I were thinking about painting the house this spring. You're going to have to pack up your things in your room so the painters can get in." He didn't say it like he was asking a favor. It was an order disguised as a casual comment. "Of course," I replied instantly. "Whatever you need." Valerie smiled, satisfied, delighted with my submissive response. "It shouldn't take more than a day or two. You can sleep on the couch in the basement while they're painting." That couch was old and sagging, with a broken spring poking through the cushions. They knew that, of course. It was just another humiliation, another silent reminder that my comfort meant nothing to them. When they went to bed, I was left alone in the kitchen, looking at the clean dishes I had just put away. For years, I told myself that family was worth everything. That love meant putting up with anything without a word of complaint. But what I heard today had nothing to do with love. It wasn't even a minimal gesture of humanity. I thought about my investments, about the assets in my name, about my stake in Maurice Market, where they had ridiculed me. I thought about the bank accounts no one else knew about and the independence I had kept hidden as if it were a sin. Maybe it was time to stop pretending. Maybe it was time to remind everyone, including myself, who Beatrice really was behind this well-constructed facade. Maybe it was time to take back control. The next day, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Valerie and Rob were still snoring and Matthew was just getting ready for school, I slipped out of the house and walked the 6 blocks downtown. My first stop was Maurice Market. Walking through those familiar aisles felt different now. Instead of the shame that had weighed me down last time, I felt something entirely new. This was, in part, my store. These shelves, these people, this whole business existed partly because of my investment and the faith I had in Bill Morris's project years ago. I found him in his office behind the customer service area, hunched over paperwork, his 68 years etched on the face. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with a genuine smile. "Beatrice, what brings you here so early?" I sat in the chair across from his desk, feeling more at ease than I had in months. "I want to talk about our partnership, Bill. It's been a while since we discussed the business." His expression changed instantly. "Is everything all right? You sound different." "I'm thinking it's time for me to get more involved in the operations," I said carefully. "I've been to hands-off for too long." Bill leaned back in his chair, studying me. "What kind of active role do you have in mind?" "I want to review our personnel policies, especially regarding customer service training. And I think it's time I had an office here. A space where I can keep an eye on the day-to-day operations." For the next hour, we went over the financials, discussed operational adjustments, and arranged for my transition from silent partner to involved owner. Bill was enthusiastic about the idea, confessing he'd been hoping I would take this step as he neared retirement. "There's something else," I said as we were finishing up. "I may need to make some changes to my will and the business succession plans. Do you know a lawyer who specializes in estate planning?" Bill's expression hardened with understanding. He knew me well enough to read between the lines. "Sarah Miller, downtown. She's handled everything from my family. She's discreet, thorough, and she doesn't get involved in personal drama." I went straight to Sarah Miller's office. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s, listened silently as I told her what was happening. When I finished, she was thoughtful for a few moments. "How long has your family been treating you this way?" she asked. "It's gotten worse in the last 5 years, since my daughter-in-law arrived. But if I'm being honest, I think I've allowed it by not setting boundaries." Sarah nodded, considering what you're describing sounds a lot like a form of financial abuse. Even if they don't know exactly what you possess, the fact that they make decisions about your life and future without your input is a serious matter. She took a legal pad and began to write. "Let's start with your current will. Who are your beneficiaries?" "Rob, my son, is the primary. I left a smaller legacy for my grandson Matthew and some donations to charities." "And you want to change that?" I took a deep breath. "I want to remove Rob completely. I want to create a trust for Matthew, accessible when he turns 25, on the condition that our relationship is based on respect, not obligation, and I want to significantly increase my charitable contributions." Sarah noted everything. "And what do you plan to do with your share of the business?" "I want to maintain control while I'm alive. but I'm considering several options for afterward, perhaps distributing it among the employees, maybe selling my shares to Bill, or perhaps something else entirely. What I don't want is for my son and his wife to inherit something they neither understand nor helped to build. We spent 2 hours reviewing possibilities, looking at trust structures, and preparing a complete estate restructuring. Sarah explained that everything I wanted would take a few weeks, but that we could begin the process immediately. One more thing, I said before leaving, I want everything handled with absolute discretion. My family cannot find out about any of this until it's all finalized. Of course, all our conversations are protected by attorney-client privilege. But Beatrice, may I offer some personal advice? I nodded. Don't let the fear of their reaction stop you. You have every right to change your mind about your inheritance, especially if those around you are not treating you well. Your money is yours, and you can do with it as you see fit. As I walked back home, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Valerie moved in, I wasn't just enduring. I was doing something. It was dawning on me that I had options, that I didn't have to just accept whatever they dished out. When I arrived, Valerie was in the kitchen making a smoothie. She shot me a look heavy with annoyance. Where were you? I needed you to watch Matthew this morning, but you just disappeared. I had to run some errands, I replied calmly. Business matters. She looked at me as if she didn't understand. What kind of business? Personal business, I answered as I started preparing lunch. She frowned more deeply. What personal business? You don't have any business. I continued chopping vegetables without replying. This time, her confusion amused me. She was so convinced she knew everything about me, so certain that I was nothing more than an old woman with no resources and no direction. Beatrice, she said now, her tone threatening. I asked you a question. I looked at her directly, something I hadn't done in years, and I answered you. I had personal business to attend to. Something in my voice made her take a small step back, her smoothie forgotten. Well, she said after a moment, now more unsettled, next time, let someone know where you're going. We worry when you just disappear like that. I almost burst out laughing. The same woman who, just a day before, was with her friends planning how to handle my death was now claiming to be worried about me. I'll keep that in mind, I replied, returning to my vegetables. As I cooked, I thought about the documents Sarah would be preparing, the office that would soon be waiting for me at Morris Market, and all the changes that were already in motion. Neither Valerie nor Rob could imagine that the comfortable world they had built for themselves was about to be shaken to its core. But I knew, and for the first time in years, I was excited about what was coming. 2 weeks had passed since I saw Bill and Sarah, and the papers were finally ready. During that time, I had taken to observing my family with new eyes, noticing their disguised cruelty and their entitlement, but no longer feeling so wounded by it. Every passive-aggressive comment, every order cloaked as a request, every moment they treated me like their servant only strengthened my resolve. This morning was different. There was a thickness in the air, the kind you feel before a storm breaks. I prepared breakfast as usual, served it in silence, and watched them eat without a single word about my effort. Rob was glued to his phone, Valerie was talking to herself as she planned her day, and Matthew ate quickly before running off to catch the bus. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Valerie looked up from her magazine, clearly annoyed. Are you expecting someone? She shot at me, her tone accusatory, as if anyone who came to the house was my responsibility. I'll get it, I said unhurriedly, wiping my hands on my apron. At the door stood Sarah Miller, looking serious and firm in her navy blue suit, a leather briefcase in her hand. Behind her was a young man I didn't know. Good morning, Mrs. Harrison. I'm here to deliver the documents we discussed. Valerie appeared almost immediately behind me, her curiosity overpowering her disdain. Who is this? She snapped. This is my lawyer, Sarah Miller, I replied, stepping aside to let them in, and I imagine she has something for me. Sarah nodded as she opened her briefcase and took out a thick envelope. Here are the documents you requested, all signed and properly filed. And this is James Morris, son of Bill Morris and the attorney handling the business transfer. Business transfer? Valerie's voice rose sharply. What business transfer? I took the envelope from Sarah, feeling its physical weight. All that time of careful planning, years of silent investing, and a lifetime of being belittled had led us to this moment. I think we should all sit down, I suggested, guiding them to the living room. Rob came out of the kitchen, drawn by the unusual activity. His face registered confusion at the sight of the lawyers, the serious atmosphere, and his mother holding official documents. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked as he sat next to Valerie on the couch. I remained standing, the still sealed envelope in my hands. "I thought it was time you both knew the true financial situation of this family." Valerie's eyes narrowed. "What are you trying to say?" "3 weeks ago, in front of complete strangers, you called me your maid," I said softly. "You laughed when the cashier was rude to me. For years, you've made me feel like a nuisance, as if my only value comes from the unpaid labor I provide." "Mom, double quotes," Rob started, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish. Last week, I overheard you talking with your friends about my death, Valerie. You were discussing how much longer you'd have to put up with me, and even calculating how little you thought you'd inherit." Valerie's face turned beet red. "You were eavesdropping. In my own house," I interrupted. "Yes, I was listening. And what I heard opened my eyes. You have no idea who I really am." I opened the envelope and took out the first paper. "This is a notification stating that you are no longer included in my will. Matthew will receive a trust fund when he turns 25, provided he learns to treat me with the basic respect any human being deserves. Everything else will be donated to charitable organizations." The color drained from Rob's face. "Mom, you can't be serious. We're family. Family doesn't treat one of their own like that," I answered without hesitation. "But that's not all you need to know." James Morris stepped forward and opened his own briefcase. "Shall I proceed with the information, Mrs. Harrison?" I nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle within me. "Start by telling them about Maurice Market." "Mrs. Harrison is the 40% owner of Maurice Market," James announced matter-of-fact. "She has been a silent partner for 15 years and, as of yesterday, is taking over direct management." Valerie's mouth fell open as if she couldn't breathe. "That's not possible. She doesn't have a dime to her name. She also holds majority shares in 3 other supermarkets in the state," James continued, "for rental properties downtown, and a real estate management company that handles 12 commercial buildings." No one said a word. The silence was heavy. I watched their faces as the truth began to sink in, as all their preconceived notions about me crumbled one by one. "How much?" Rob murmured, his voice cracking. "How much are we talking about, exactly?" Sarah flipped through her papers before answering. "Including liquid assets, business holdings, and properties. Conservatively, we're looking at about $47 million. Valerie made a choked sound, as if the air had been knocked out of her. She gripped the edge of the sofa, her perfect nails digging into the fabric. $47 million, she repeated, as if in a trance. "You've had that this whole time." "What I had was the foundation," I replied steadily. "I built it, piece by piece, with every investment, while you saw me as a burden, while you planned to stick me in some cheap retirement home, while you waited for me to die so you could split my little nest egg." Rob stood up abruptly and paced nervously to the window. "Why didn't you ever tell us? Why did you let us believe?" "Believe what?" I shot back. "That you were doing me a favor by letting me live in this house. That I should be grateful for your scraps of attention and empty gestures of politeness. If we had known, we would have treated you differently," Valerie blurted out, her tone barely masking her guilt. "Exactly," I told her. "You would have treated me differently because of the money, not because of who I am. And that tells me everything I need to know about you." Sarah cleared her throat, ever the professional. "There is one other matter. Mrs. Harrison has also acquired this property. Mr. Harrison, the mortgage was transferred to her company yesterday. You have 30 days to find another place to live." The complete collapse was etched on their faces. Rob sank back down as if his legs had been cut out from under him, covering his face with his hands. Valerie stared at me as if she no longer knew who I was, as if she'd just discovered she'd been living with a stranger all this time. "You can't do this," she whispered. "This is our home, Matthew's home. This place was my home long before it was yours," I replied calmly. "I've been here for 22 years. You've been here for 5, and in that time, you've done nothing but make it clear that I no longer belong." I put the papers back in the envelope, feeling lighter with every passing second. "The lawyers will handle the necessary arrangements. I'll be staying at a hotel downtown while I organize things." I turned toward the stairs to pack, when Rob called out my name, his voice broken. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We can change." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "I'm 70 years old, Rob. I'm not going to wait any longer for you to learn how to love me the way I deserve. 6 months later, I was sitting on the terrace of my villa overlooking Lake Como, watching the morning sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. My espresso, served meticulously by Alina, my housekeeper, was perfect. She treated me with a natural dignity that had made me forget such respect still existed. The change wasn't immediate. After leaving Rob and Valerie's house, I spent 3 weeks in a downtown hotel while Sarah and her team conducted a thorough audit of all my assets. The final number was staggering, even to me. 50 million, half a century of smart investments, quiet deals, and financial patience had generated a wealth I had never stopped to calculate. I had downplayed everything I had achieved. With Sarah's help, I sold several properties, consolidated my investments, and organized my finances for a life abroad. I transferred ownership of the supermarkets to the employees through a generous buyout plan. The rental properties were placed under a management company with clear instructions: keep the rent affordable for hardworking families. I kept only what was essential to live peacefully, far from those who had once made me feel so small. Choosing Italy wasn't difficult. I had always wanted to see the world, but those dreams were buried under the responsibilities of daily life. Now, with all the time and resources in the world, I could finally live the life I had postponed for so long. The villa was exactly what I was looking for, simple yet elegant. 3 bedrooms, each with glass doors opening onto gardens that cascaded down to the lake. A library filled with books I could finally read at my leisure. A kitchen where I cooked for pleasure, not out of obligation. Alina knocked softly on the terrace door, the cordless phone in her hand. Signora Beatrice, there is a call from America. A young man named Matthew. My grandson had been calling every week since I left, at first with anger and confusion, then more calmly, as if time was giving him clarity. Our conversations shifted from accusations to questions, and then to something that felt a lot like understanding. Grandma, his voice sounded different now, deeper with age. How are you? I'm very well, sweetheart. And how are things at home? He was quiet for a moment. Different. Mom and Dad are getting a divorce. Mom moved out last month. I wasn't surprised. Without the illusion of an inheritance to bind them, their relationship had no foundation. Valerie had likely moved on to find someone else to manipulate. Are you okay? I asked gently. Yeah, I think so. Dad's been talking about you a lot. He wants to call you. And what do you think about that? Another pause, longer this time. I think he's just starting to realize how badly he screwed up, but I also think he's saying it because he found out about your money. I was struck by his clarity. At 13, Matthew was already showing an emotional maturity his parents never had. And you? I asked him, are you upset about the money, or about how we treated each other? I'm upset that I made fun of you that day at the store, he said quietly. I knew it was wrong, but I wanted Mom and Dad to laugh. It was a stupid thing to do. A lump formed in my throat. Thank you for saying that. You have no idea how much that means to me. Grandma, could I come visit you someday? Not because of the money, but because I miss you. I smiled, looking out at the clear lake where a small boat glided across the calm water. I would love that, but only when you're old enough to travel alone, and only if you come for the right reasons. I want to see where you live. Now, Dad showed me some pictures online. It looks beautiful. When I hung up, I sat there in silence, thinking, Matthew was the one good thing that had come out of everything with Rob and Valerie. He still had time to learn, to change, to not repeat the same mistakes. Maybe there was still hope of salvaging at least one bond from that entire disaster. Rob had tried to call me many times, but I never answered. The messages he sent through Matthew were always the same. He was sorry. He wasn't the same person. He wanted to fix everything. But I knew that story all too well. It usually came right when he needed something. This time, the only difference was that his need was greater. Alina returned once more, this time with a silver tray in her hands, bearing carefully cut fresh fruit and the day's mail. Among the envelopes, one stood out for its familiar handwriting. I didn't have to look twice to know it was from Valerie. Her script, with its overly pronounced loops, was unmistakable. For a moment, I was tempted to throw it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me, as it sometimes does. Inside were 3 pages written in a mix of demands and pleas. As if she couldn't decide whether she was threatening or begging, she ordered me to pay her divorce attorney's fees. warned me that if I didn't, she would take Matthew away from me, and promised she would change if I agreed to amend the will. She accused me of destroying everything out of resentment for not forgiving her. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and folded the letter with a new sense of calm. I walked slowly to the stone fireplace in my living room and, without a word, placed it on the embers. It burned quickly, without resistance, and in seconds, nothing was left but ashes and that faint smell of burnt paper that sometimes settles in your chest. Some bonds, no matter how painful, should not be rebuilt. That same afternoon, I went for a walk through the village market, a place that already feels like home, practicing the Italian I've been learning with the merchants who treat me like they've known me forever. Signora Martini, who always has the most beautiful flowers imaginable, gave me a handful of extra roses to brighten my dining room. Giuseppe, the baker, already knows I stop by every week and saves his freshest loaves for me. None of them have any idea how much money I have or what I've been through. They just like me, and that's enough. I enjoy being with them, to their stories, their jokes, that warmth without judgment. This is what family should feel like. A place where you don't have to explain yourself, where there are no hidden knives behind words or glances heavy with resentment. That night, before going to sleep, I called my financial advisor in New York to review the most recent donations. We discussed a foundation for elderly adults abandoned by their families, a scholarship program for single mothers who want to build their own businesses with dignity, and a support fund for those who need to escape homes where affection has turned into control and guilt. For the first time in many years, I felt that the money in my accounts was serving a purpose that reflected me, not propping up those who never knew how to value me in the slightest. As the sun set behind Lake Como, painting the sky in deep oranges and brilliant purples like a masterpiece you never tire of seeing, I raised my wineglass in a silent toast. I toasted alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I toasted 2 second chances, to the freedom that arrives when you least expect it, and to the courage to choose yourself in a world that wants you to always put others first. At 70 years old, I finally felt like I was beginning my real life. The woman who, just a few months ago, was called the help in a supermarket, was now living like the queen she had always been inside. And the most powerful thing of all is that this isn't the end. This is just the first page of a new story. The mornings at Lake Como, Italy, begin with the crackle of fresh bread, a simple sound that tastes like home. The baker no longer asks what I want. He sees me coming, smiles with his eyes and hands. Me, the most golden loaf, wrapped in thick paper and tied with string. For Signora Beatrice, he says, as if he's known me forever. Sometimes I think he has. Because this village has looked at me with more tenderness in 6 months than my family did in 20 years. When I walk back through the cobblestone streets, the air smells of lemon and lavender. The lake is still, and so am I. Today is Tuesday. Tuesday means a call with Sarah Miller to review the trust. It means checking on pending donations, authorizing expenses for the foundation we established in my name and idea. I never would have dreamed of allowing myself, if I were still living, under the same roof as Valerie. But today, I don't feel like talking about money. Today, another envelope arrived from the States. No return address, just my name, neatly written, with those slanted capital letters I recognize without needing to open it. Rob. I sat on the terrace with a blanket over my legs. The envelope wasn't heavy, but it carried the weight of years. I opened it. Inside, a handwritten letter. No beating around the bush. Direct, in a way he never was when he had me close. He told me about his new life. A small apartment. No Valerie, no luxuries, with Matthew half the time. He said that sometimes he can't sleep for the shame, that he dreams of going back, of taking back that laugh in the supermarket, of defending me from words he never stood up to. He said he now understands the value of a mother when he no longer has anyone who looks at him the way I did when he was a child. He asked to see me, not to ask for money, he said, but to ask for forgiveness. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer of the cabinet that faces the lake. I didn't tear it up, nor did I reply. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation, and some scars don't close just because someone is sorry. That afternoon, I went for a walk along the path that borders the water. I passed children playing with stones, a woman my age knitting in silence, and a group of loud tourists who had no idea where they were. I stopped at my usual bench, the one that looks directly at the reflection of the sky on the lake, and there, I met someone else. She was a slim, dark-haired woman with a Texan accent and a shy smile. Her name was Lucy. We talked for hours, without meaning to. It turns out she was also an American widow. She had worked as a nurse in Houston until her children got married and forgot she existed. One day, I realized months would go by without a call, she said, looking at me with a sadness I knew well, and I thought, if they don't need me anymore, maybe it's time I needed myself. We laughed as if we were characters in the same story, written by different pens. From that day on, Lucy and I became friends. We cooked together on Sundays, chili, enchiladas, cornbread. We mix flavors from back home with ingredients from here. We talk about ranches, old country songs, and what it's like to be born a woman in America and grow old without becoming invisible. With Lucy, I feel like I'm part of something again. Matthew still calls, now, not to ask for things, but to tell me about his day. He says he wants to study film, that he's writing a short film about a grandmother who runs away from home and becomes powerful. It's not about you, Grandma, he says, but we both know it is. Rob wrote again, this time, just one sentence. If you ever decide I can look you in the eye again, I'll be here. I don't know if that will ever be enough. I don't know if we'll ever speak face to face again. But at least now I know that the silence I left behind wasn't empty. It was necessary. Sometimes, you have to let what's broken break completely. It's the only way to start something new from scratch. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, my face clean, no makeup, no masks, and I recognized myself. Beatrice, not mother, not grandmother, not maid, not Marta. Beatrice, the woman who built her world with her own hands, who fell, who crawled, and who got back up again, and not for revenge, not to prove a point, but simply because, finally, she realized she deserved to. It was a morning in May when the past knocked on my door. It wasn't a call, or a letter, or a chance encounter at the market. It was him, in the flesh, standing in front of my villa on Lake Como. Rob, I knew before I opened the door. I felt something different in the air, like when you know it's going to rain even if the sky is clear. I peeked from the library window. There he was, thinner, his hair graying at the temples, his shoulders slumped with something I couldn't tell if it was guilt or exhaustion. He had no luggage, no flowers, none of the arrogant look that used to follow him like a shadow. He was just holding a notebook in his hands. Alina had let him into the garden, not knowing who he was. When I came down, I found him sitting under the old olive tree, on the same bench where I often read in the afternoons. He didn't stand up, he didn't speak, he just clutched that notebook as if it held everything he couldn't say before. I sat across from him. The lake, in the background, was silent. Why did you come? I asked, my voice neither harsh nor soft. Rob swallowed hard. It took him a moment, because I don't know how to carry this alone anymore, he finally said, and held out the notebook. I opened it. It wasn't a letter. It was pages and pages of memories, of our house when he was a child, of my cooking, of how I used to sing him to sleep, of the first time he cried after his father left, and how I covered him with a blanket without telling him that my own soul was raw. The words were written with a clumsiness that broke something inside me. I wrote it at night, when Matthew was asleep, he said, his voice cracking. I realized I didn't know who you were. I never really saw you, Mom. I only saw what was convenient for me, and what she told me to see. I remained silent. Pain doesn't disappear just because someone acknowledges it, but at least it finds a new place to rest. I didn't come for you to forgive me, he continued. I came to tell you in person, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to teach my son how to be a better man than I am. That sentence hung in the air between us, as if he finally understood that a legacy isn't about houses or wills, it's about how you love, how you remember. Matthew is growing up, I said. He tells me things sometimes, good things. He's starting to see you differently. Rob nodded. His eyes were full, but he didn't cry. He was no longer the man who laughed when I was humiliated. Now, he seemed like a child finally seeing the ruins of something he had helped destroy. I don't care about the money, he said calmly. I don't care if you never speak to me again, but I wanted to thank you for not giving up, for being stronger than me, than all of us. I closed the notebook. I held it in my hands like something fragile. And I knew I wasn't going to forgive him today, but maybe tomorrow, or the day after, or never. It didn't have to be decided now. So what are you going to do now? I asked him. Go back to the States, he replied. Keep raising my son, keep writing, maybe help other older people who are going through what you went through. Not because I can change what I did, but because I want Matthew to see that you can choose to be different. I looked at him a moment longer. Then I stood up and gestured toward the terrace. Would you like some coffee? Rob looked at me as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Just coffee, I clarified. Nothing more. He nodded slowly. He walked behind me, without a word. We sat facing the lake with 2 steaming mugs between us. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We didn't talk about the past. We just watched the water, the reflection of the mountains, and the shared silence that, for the first time, wasn't heavy. A week later, he left. He didn't ask to stay. He didn't ask to come back. He hugged me without expecting me to hug him back. I placed the notebook in his hand. He should keep it. It was his story, not mine. When the car disappeared among the cypress trees on the road, I didn't cry. I just went into the kitchen and helped myself to a piece of sweetbread I had baked. That morning, Lucy arrived a little later with her chili. We ate and laughed. She told me about a trip to Spain she wanted to take. She asked if I wanted to join her. Maybe, I told her. I'm not afraid of leaving anymore. That night, as the moon streamed through the large windows, I sat down to write. Not letters, not complaints, stories, my own. The ones I had denied myself for so long. Stories of invisible women who decide to see themselves, of grandmothers who escape, of mothers who learn to live for themselves. Stories of love, but also of dignity. Because, at 70, I finally understand that there are things you don't beg for: respect, peace, place of your own. And while no one can ever go back to who they were, they can choose who they want to be after the earthquake. I chose to be free. And this time, I'm not asking for permission. Today, Matthew turned 14. I woke up before the sun, as if my Bofty still remembered that, in another life, birthdays were days for balloons and cakes. Instead, I made coffee, lit a candle facing the lake, and sent him a short message. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I miss you, with a clean kind of love. I didn't expect a reply. At that age, you don't answer quickly, especially not a grandmother who lives on the other side of the world. Mid-morning, Elena knocked on the door. Signora, there is a package. For you. It was a small box, wrapped carefully. No return address. Inside, a drawing, done by hand, with uncertain lines but full of intention. It was me, sitting on the garden bench, the lake behind me, a book in my hands, and below, in black ink, "This is how I remembered you today, M." He didn't write Grandma. He didn't write "I love you," but he didn't have to. I stared at that piece of paper as if it were gold, as if I had waited a lifetime for someone to see me like this, at peace, whole, my own. I went out to the terrace. The sun was shining softly on the water. And for the first time since I came to this country, I put flowers on the table, not out of loneliness, not out of nostalgia, just because today, someone thought of me without asking for anything in return. And that, in my story, is a miracle. A small one, but enough. We tell this story based on real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of the person involved. It is the story of a mother who sacrificed her entire life for her children and grandchildren, only to be despised, used, and abandoned in the end. But when she had nothing left to lose, she rose up, and this time, she lived for herself. We don't tell it to judge, but so that anyone who hears it might stop and think, how many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes. Now, I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever experienced something similar? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'm leaving 2 more of our channel's favorite stories on the end screen for you, which will surely surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.